Good morning, everybody. First off, this is being recorded, and I'll talk a little bit later about how you can get a copy of the recording. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Dave Hughes. I'm Director of Product Management with Leverage. We are the service corporation for the League of Southeastern Credit Unions. As you can see on the screen, the title of our presentation today is Cybersecurity, Current Threats, Recent Exam Findings, and Regulatory Compliance. The format of the webinar today is that we have two presenters, as you can see on your screen. Thomas Lux will go first, and then that'll be followed by questions. And then Jim Sankson will go second, and follow it up with questions for Jim. If you have any questions throughout the presentations, just type them into the chat, and we'll answer them after each person has spoke. Again, the webinar is being recorded and a slide deck will be available afterwards. And if you'd like a copy of that, you can just email me. I'll put my email in the chat. And with that, we'll take a look at the agenda here. So today's topics are current cyber threats, cybersecurity defenses and alerting best practices, NCUA and state examination focus and most common findings, what it means to be compliant with NCUA Reg 748 A and B, planning for the future, and we'll have 10 minutes at the end for questions and answers. Let's see. So next, let's talk a little bit about our presenters. First off, we have Mr. Thomas Lux. Thomas started working with NCUA in 2011 as a field examiner and currently works as a regional information systems officer. Prior to NCUA, Thomas worked for FDIC as a field examiner in Jackson, Mississippi. He was once a crew chief and frontline dispatcher with the German Air Force at the Flight Training Center in New Mexico. Thomas holds a BBA and MBA degrees from New Mexico State University. Jim Sankson, your second speaker, has over 20 years of experience in the information security, financial services, and technology industries. Conveying the knowledge and conviction it takes to fight cybercrime, Jim offers a realistic view of today's security, privacy, risk issues, and remedies for the business community. He blends business goals with technology, training policies, and improved processes to provide the appropriate program and regulatory compliance for each individual company. Jim is a regular speaker and expert witness on information security, cybersecurity, and data privacy. Pivot Group is also an official services partner of Leverage. And with that, I'll turn it over to Thomas.
All right. Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it. So good morning, everyone. Glad to see everybody showing up again for this webinar. It's going to be interesting. But before I go in, let me read you a quick disclaimer here. Dave, next slide. So any opinions expressed are my own views and do not necessarily reflect those of the National Credit Union Administration or the NCUA board. All right, with that out of the way, let's go on the agenda. So I'm going to talk about current threats today, common findings we have in the field, and best practices to kind of protect yourself and your network from common attacks. Okay, so talking about current threats out there, number one, and that's why I have it in bold in big letters, is ransomware. It's not only the number one threat out there, but it's also that's where you lose the most of your money. So I've been following up on two recent credit unions, and they were a victim of ransomware attack, and unfortunately they ended up paying the ransom because some of their backups were encrypted, that they closed their doors. So it's serious. It's a threat out there, and again, it leads to a lot of monetary losses if you end up paying the ransom. Yes, the bond company sometimes, or usually, they send out a negotiator with the threat actors, and they are able to negotiate it down to maybe half of what they asked for. But still, you're going to lose a lot of money, and that beside your reputational risk and whatever comes with it. So number one threat out there. The second one is business email compromise. It's very common, BEC. Some of you might have seen it already, especially the C-suite. They get targeted with BEC attacks. And BEC, what that is, the threat actors kind of scope out the credit union, scope out management, and they try to extract and make management or high-ranking CEOs or C-suite members to transfer funds out of the credit union. So that's another threat where you're losing money on that side. BECs also can lead to ransomware attacks because what they do is they're sending phishing emails. They try to pretend to be somebody else within the credit union, ordering somebody else to wire funds out, but they also phish for credentials. So if that doesn't happen, and credit unions are fairly good in spotting those emails and deleting them or whatever. So if the threat actors are not able to transfer funds out of the credit union, they fall back to, if they fished for any credentials, they're going to use those credentials to try to breach your network and then inject ransomware or malware. So both threats are kind of go hand in hand. So be aware of that BEC attacks can lead to ransomware if credentials are phished from staff members. I'm going to talk about how to prevent that from happening when I talk about best practices. The third threat we'll see, or the most incidents that have been reported, are skimming. That's just your average day, usual skimming device installed on an ATM or ITM, and nothing new here. But it is still going on. Apparently, threat actors making money with that. So just be aware. Check your ATMs regularly. If you have it outsourced to vendors, just ask your vendors to check regularly for any skimming devices. And then fourth, of course, everybody knows that we got the vendor breaches, where vendors you work with as a credit union, they get breached, that they may store member data from you, and it's compromised. So in that regard, there's probably nothing you can do really other than make sure that your contracts include kind of a clause where it says that the vendor is obligated to notify the credit union if they have been breached and if your member data has been compromised on their side. So then you can take the necessary steps. Okay, so that's about current threats. Next slide. So as I mentioned before, I want to talk about common findings we have in the field when we work as RISOs, do your IT/information security exam. So what I did, I filtered by findings on the national level and then findings on the regional level. So basically what's happening here in the region. But I wanted to show you this first graph here. The common findings on the national level, number one is the risk assessment by far. And risk assessment is why we focus so much on reviewing your risk assessment. Is because it is part of the foundation of your information security program. So the information security program, the two main parts it consists of is governance and ownership. So that's usually done through either you, the SIT manager, the CIO, and maybe an IT steering committee, and then risk management practices. And the best you can do that is through a risk assessment. So that's why this is usually a common finding. Risk assessments are either not there, they don't exist, because nobody has a concept of how to establish them, generate them, maintain them. So a lot of credit unions choose to outsource risk assessment, which is not a problem. You can outsource it. Just be aware that these risk assessment, if they're done by a third-party vendor, they could be very general or boilerplate approach. Because what these vendors do, they have their own checklist where they perform their risk assessment, and they don't necessarily know about the products and services within the credit union. So just be aware of it. It's perfectly fine to outsource it if you don't have the experience or the knowledge how to do them. But if you outsource them, make sure you tell them the specific products and services that relate to information security, that these are also risk assessed, like payment systems, ATMs, things like that, virtual environments. So the second finding is Yeah, it's the business continuity, disaster recovery testing. That is usually because either the plans are very general, they are not sufficient, or again, they don't exist. Believe it or not, a lot of credit unions still don't have a disaster recovery test plan, or it's like a general one they got from another credit union where still the credit union, the other credit union's name is on it. But I think the biggest issue there is a lot of these plans have just not been tested. So I see good plans out there, but they just not been tested. So you remember me talking about ransomware and all these other attacks. So that's when you want to have your plans tested ahead of time to make sure that if something happens to your credit union, if you become a victim of an attack, that you're in the best shape and place to mitigate the impact of that attack. So that's why it's so crucial to test these plans, whether it's a disaster recovery plan or business continuity plan or incident response plan. They all kind of go hand in hand. So test them. Third finding is in regards to incident response, and it's kind of the same issue like with the business continuity plans. It's either they are insufficient, they are too general, or they just have not been tested. So moving forward to the common findings on the regional level. Next slide. So these are sorted by the southern region. And here you see it's quite a change in findings. Number one finding we have here is asset inventory. And what that means is usually when we do our IT exams, part of that is looking at your asset inventories, whether it's network devices, operating systems, workstations, software. We are looking for end of life cycle systems. And in 99% of the exams we do, we find end of life cycle systems. So that means either an old Windows 8 computer, server 2008, server 2016, all these assets that where support from Windows stopped or from the operating system provider. That's why you see asset inventory, because that kind of directly ties to the end of life cycle systems. That's what we find. And sometimes there's good reason why you have an old 2008 server, because it's a vendor that can't switch, can't upgrade because you have old credit card data on it. But make it a point to go through your inventories, find out what your end of life cycle systems are, and try to get them upgraded as soon or decommissioned as soon as possible, because they present definitely a weakness within your network. And guess what? If the malware is injected and it's moving through your network, guess where it goes first? The weakest point, which is end of life cycle systems. So we have seen it. I have seen it recently with the latest ransomware attacks. So I'm not making this up. Make sure your end of life cycle systems are upgraded. Second one here, we are back to the risk assessment. As I mentioned, they're either not there or too general, or the format is not right. So that's another common finding we have in the southern region, is the risk assessment as well. And the third one is incident response. My guess here, I'm speculating here, it's again with the plans, the incident response plans are not sufficient or have not been tested. But another reason I think here plays a role is the introduction of the cyber incident reporting rule that came into effect last September. And I think we're checking your incident response plans. And in most cases, the finding is in regards to they have not been updated with the new requirements of the rule. Remember, it requires you to report any incidents to your regulator or NCUA within 72 hours. So make sure your plans include that. And also the new contact information. So there's this email that goes to NCUA, or you can make a phone call to report these incidents. So go back to the plans, make sure contact information is updated and the 72-hour requirement. So that's it for common findings. Next slide. I would like to talk about best practices, how you can protect yourself from these attacks or from some of these malware. So as I mentioned before, ransomware is our threat. You want to be very aware of that. And in order to combat that and put you in a better position so you don't have to close your doors when the time comes, and if you're starting negotiating with the threat actors, is backups. Backups, it's absolutely crucial that you do the backups, and it's also crucial that you test them and restore them. And so you have to have a consistent schedule where you test them and restore them. And based on the product, the backup product you're using, whether it's air-gapped, tapes, cloud storage, whatever it is, you need to have a written procedure in place that not only specifies the specific product, the specific procedure, but also a testing schedule. So I have been to a credit union recently where they had a pretty good program, backup program in place, where the IT manager went ahead and tested, I believe, the core files on a monthly basis. So he pulled some from the cloud, he restored them. He didn't restore everything, but he tested a few files just to make sure that they were current, that they actually existed, and that he was able to restore them. And on a quarterly basis, I believe he did test the enterprise data. So he was pulling some files from his, they still had backup tapes. And at the end of the backup, they were taking them off the network, air-gapped them. So he took the tape, restored some files from the tape, and that worked. So that was a pretty consistent procedure and very safe to do so. So make sure that your information security policy or standards and procedures manual lay out a backup process and a backup testing schedule. So that's absolutely crucial. If you get hit with ransomware, and it's not a question of if, but when, if you get hit, you want to make sure your backups are tested and current. And also look at the products you're using. There's so many backup products out there. Like I said, cloud, immutable, tapes, whatever it is, on-site, off-site, storage. So look at the products and make also sure that you protect your backups with maybe multi-factor authentication. If the vendor offers that, use multi-factor authentication to get to your files. So the last one I followed up on, unfortunately, their backups got encrypted. I don't know how they did it, how they got into the backups, but it happened. And yeah, so make sure that, I think that's another additional control you can put in place, multi-factor authentication specifically for backups. When it comes to phishing, training, that's the key here. Make sure I know a lot of you use common vendors out there that provide specific information security training. KnowBe4 is one of the big ones out there. So make sure you have also a consistent schedule where you train not only staff and your board members, but also C-suite management. Everybody is trained, and you're sending out these phishing campaigns. Test them, switch out the departments when you send them the phishing emails so they don't get bothered or they get into this routine where they just keep on deleting emails and not really getting anything out of the training. So kind of structure the training program, and again, make it a schedule. BEC, the number one control here you want to have in place is multi-factor authentication, whether it's using it for your email or for Active Directory. Multi-factor authentication, wherever you can implement it, implement it. It is the number one control to prevent you, not prevent it, but to make sure that it doesn't spread any further. No matter how they get in through the phishing emails or whatever, multi-factor authentication is definitely the number one control here. As a reference, you can read up about that. A little bit of guidance is, I posted here the letter to credit unions, 21 risk 01. And what you can do is just copy and paste this term for the letter and Google it, and it brings you right to the NCUA's website where it lists all the letters of credit unions to credit unions. So it has a search function. You can search for all these letters. They have been issued by NCUA for the last couple of decades. So you can sort through them. You can search for vendor management, multi-factor authentications, whatever. So my recommendation here is that you just Google letter to credit unions, and it brings you right to the NCUA website. A reason I didn't post a link here is just because I booked it, marked it so many times. And every time I need it, I click on my bookmark. The link doesn't exist anymore. So I found it easier to just Google letter of credit unions, and it takes you right to the NCUA website where you can download all these letters and guidance and risk letters. Okay, next slide. Another part of best practices, another thing you can do is, as I mentioned before, assess your incident response plan and your business continuity plans. And I know a lot of you have different plans, a variety of plans. Some call it disaster recovery plans, some call it business continuity, and they incorporate the incident response plan. So it's really up to you. But the larger you get in complexity, or the larger the credit unions get, you should really have 3 different plans in place: disaster recovery, business continuity, and incident response. Either way, no matter how you have it structured, make sure that you revisit those plans and, like I said, test them. Also, these plans should in detail define the roles and responsibilities of everyone in the credit union, who is responsible for what in case something happens. And maybe for the incident response plan, you also want to include some sample scenarios. For example, DDoS attacks, ransomware attacks, account takeovers, online banking, website defacement, things like common threat scenarios that are out there, and just list them in the incident response plan or business continuity plan. And then what that also does, not only do you have scenarios laid out and then actual procedures for every specific scenario, what happens, what you're going to do whenever a scenario happens, but it also gives you some scenarios you can test on an annual basis. Say you have a DDoS attack. Okay, so next year we're going to test just a DDoS attack. What are we going to do about that? The following year, you do a ransomware attack, you simulate one, and you test that one. It's okay to do tabletop tests, but for disaster recovery, you definitely want to do a complete test once a year, involving all departments and all critical systems that need to be up and running within 24, 48, 72 hours. All right, but like I said, you need to test these plans. Absolutely crucial. All right, here's my contact. So if you got any questions out for me, just feel free to contact me, call me. I'm available. If I don't respond immediately, I probably will respond within the next 24 hours. Okay, thank you. That concludes my presentation, and I guess we're open for questions.
Actually, Thomas, I have a question here for you. Does NCUA routinely publish security alerts, and where can they be located?
Yes, like I said, like I mentioned before, that one risk letter that referred to multi-factor authentication, that's kind of part of these alerts. The first thing you want to do is probably contact the person within your credit union that handles the call reports, because usually when these NCUA alerts or letters go out to the credit unions, they will be sent to the email address that is registered to do the call reports or with the call reports. So find out who that person is. It's usually the CFO or somebody in accounting, because they are the people who prepare the call reports, and they are most likely getting these alerts. So make sure to talk to the person that you are, as the CIO or IT manager, that you are included in these alerts, or that these alerts are getting forwarded to you. The other thing you can do, like I said before, just log in, just Google letter to credit unions or risk alerts, NCUA, and then it takes you straight to the NCUA website where you can research and follow up on previous letters.
Another question, Thomas. Do you see any major changes in the NCUA examination program for IT cybersecurity for 2025?
No, I don't see any changes. 2 years ago, we implemented our new information security exam tool, which is kind of a scaled down version of the ACET. Some of you might have seen it already when we did our exams. It's a very good tool we are using. It gives us very good structure. I like it a lot. So, and I don't see any upcoming changes to the information security exam in the near future.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. And next we have Jim Sankson of Pivot Group speaking.
Good morning, everybody. This is Jim. Thank you, Thomas, for the current updates from NCUA with regards to current findings, exam findings, and current threats that you're looking for. Just a brief intro to us. We're a national independent audit assessment and compliance firm that only exclusively provides information security and data privacy and protection services. What we're going to do right now is dig a little deeper into what Thomas was talking about with current threats and current findings, and talk about some other things we are seeing out there in the last 2 to 3 months with regards to our audits and assessments. This current threat environment mirrors very well with what Thomas was talking about, with ransomware being at the top. Business email compromise, if not tied with ransomware, but very, very close second. And then there's something else that's bubbling up that we're going to spend a little bit of time on today, which is the friendly and elderly fraud. This is something we're seeing escalate in this high threat environment that we're in, that we want to talk about and make sure that your credit union is aware of and prepared for. One of the big things we're trying to do here is stop the data leakage coming out of the credit union. What controls can we have in place? Whether they be a technical control, people control, policy control, governance control. Those are the things that we want to look at and make sure we identify not only the ongoing threats, but the upcoming threats as well. One of the new ransomware strains that we've seen in the last couple months is the attacking the VPN. And I'm going to play off Thomas's scenario. If you want to know more about this, obviously you can contact us, or you can Google, "Lost in the Fog ransomware." It came out in late summer of this year. And what it does, and it targeted, unfortunately, the educational sector, but now it's moving into the financial sector. And so listed below are some of the bullet points that the credit union should look at to make sure that you've tidied up your VPN access and secure controls. And so one of these recommendations is tie your VPN credentials to Active Directory, implement MFA on your VPN connections, review all unused VPN credentials and terminate. As usual, backup and restore procedures and test it on all your VPN access. Encrypt your data on your network. Employee training is huge on how to safely use and securely use your VPN connections, and eliminate your end-of-life systems. So pay attention to this. This is a big takeaway from today's webinar, is that look at this new ransomware. It has the same credentials and profile as your typical ransomware, but now they're attacking the VPN tunnels as well. Friendly and elderly fraud. We got involved with several credit unions over the last 2 to 3 months on the incident response side, where somehow, some way, and it's a target attack on our members, and either through friendly relationships or preying on elderly, which could be anywhere from phishing exercises to social engineering, is that there's been a big uptick on the amount of fraud that is going on between friends of the members, peers of the members, and just outside the community for the elderly, targeting them. The communication here and direction here is review and update your member communication procedures. One of the things we find, and it's so easy to do. And we'll talk a little bit more about that with the advent of artificial intelligence. So when a member calls in, maybe you've been dealing with them on a very regular basis, or possibly an informal basis as well, and say, "Oh, hi, this is Joe. Oh, hi, Mr. Joe. How are you? What can we do for you today?" It is so easy now to mirror and mimic the voices and caricatures of our members with all the technologies out there. Is that one of the things I'd like to convey today is just review and update your member communication procedures and what you will allow, verbally or not verbally, and must be in writing. Okay. Also review and update your wire and ACH procedures. Make sure they're current with the times. Make sure that you've got the dual controls in place from a wire and ACH procedures. We seem to be doing a very good job of alerting and educating our employees, but we need to do the same for our members as well. Make sure that whatever is going on, if there is an attack or there is a scenario going on that seems to be happening with your credit union or your community credit unions, with regards to friendly and elderly fraud, make sure that you have a way to alert them and educate them on this issue. The other thing we find out, and I think this is a great action item as well, because when we were assisting in the incident response arena, and when we talk to our bond company or talk to their insurance company, what do they recommend and what do they cover during this particular event? So be on the lookout. And like I say, we see a big uptick on this in the marketplace on the friendly and elderly fraud. One of the ways that they do this, okay, is not only through phishing exercises now, but they're getting even more sophisticated, meaning they're using vishing and smishing, okay, which means they're using the phone calls and the texting, all right, in addition to email, to initiate conversation and initiate action upon our members. So if you see this, okay, and initiate, and we got to look at the P2P fraud as well, peer-to-peer fraud, that somehow, some way, they pick on the vulnerable and the less in tune. But if we see this, and we got to educate our members and our employees that not only will it be just a phishing attacks, but now they're using a combination threat attack with using both phishing and smishing, okay, which is voice, phone calls and texting, as well as email, to initiate this transaction with our members. So again, here's a list of things we have compiled based on helping a couple of our credit unions through this process. But notify members, have a way of notifying your members via website and newsletters. Make sure you and your members have multi-factored enabled on all the critical and payment systems. Again, review your member requests and contact procedures to ensure current and appropriate. We have a saying, I know we probably have some credit unions who may not be a part of the Southeast geography, but we have a saying in the South, we just trust people. All right. Well, unfortunately, we've kind of evolved from that. And so when we have a request from a member, make sure that we document it. It's in writing, and possibly have written escalation procedures and dual controls in place where possible, which segues to the next bullet here. Make sure you have dual controls implemented on all your critical systems and processes. This is very, very important. Train your employees on how this incident is occurring or can occur, and the appropriate defense and best practices. This is another great point that we considered and have implemented with our credit unions is make sure you vet your third-party online banking and P2P vendors. And when I say that, to make sure that their communication standards and request standards and their security controls are in place. So when they get these requests from members, both for asking for credentials or moving money around from P2P, that they have the appropriate credentials and procedures in place as well. Because what we found in a couple of our activities was that there's a little lapse in the third-party online banking security controls. Therefore, it constituted the loss of funds, okay, via some P2P vendor or even through online banking. So make sure when you're in your vendor management portion of your information security that they have the proper procedures in place as well, as far as member requests and contact procedures, and escalating that and upgrading your particular program to constitute not only phishing, but also your phishing and smishing attacks as well. One of the things that was recommended with one of our credit unions that we were helping out with the incident response was, if you're going through a time and this thing does not, what we saw, the life cycle of this is not an hour or a day. It could goes on for weeks once they find a targeted vendor. I think the most frustrating thing for our credit union is somehow, some way, they get a member information. All right, when I say member information, they have names, they have social security numbers, they have your account numbers, your card numbers. And typically that's not a fault of the credit union. It's a result of possibly your vendor or all these data breaches that are going on, but they have the credential information and now they can imitate voices on this. So it is very, very crucial that you do the same level of due diligence and vetting as you do on your credit union, but also for your third-party online banking and your P2P vendors. And then one of the things we saw, like I said, this usually takes on a life cycle till they can't exercise their attacks and not getting fruits for their labor. But if something's going on like that, consider lowering your P2P transfer limits for a number of transactions to help reduce the exposure during this particular time till the threat level minimizes. All right, this is an interesting slide, and this is called Getting Back to Basics. We got this from the Cybersecurity Institute of Security Association. This goes back to your password complexity. And what you see here, and the action item out of here, is just how easy it is now to crack passwords. And what I'd like to do as a recommendation of this particular webinar is review your password policy. Okay, with all the tools out there and everything else, I think if you sit there and look at the grid across the top, if you only got numbers only, lowercase letters, uppercase and lowercase letters, or right now the trend is numbers and uppercase, lowercase letters. If you get to 12, if you're only at 11 characters, there's still that password. They have the tools out there that can be cracked within 10 months even. So kind of look at where you want to be in the orangish level. Like I say, in the 12, 13, 14 characters, numbers, uppercase, lowercase letters, and symbols. I know it's tough, okay, because there's a lot of cultural things, okay, and you have multiple systems out there that you use that can accommodate this or cannot accommodate this. But the action item here is, please look at this and find out what your risk threshold is and what your systems can accommodate, and what is good for the culture of your credit union. But I think the shock factor here is that if we're only in the 10, 11 character range, and we're only using upper and lowercase letters, it's a matter of minutes or hours or months. So again, what I'd like to stress is kind of review your password policies and see if you can't raise the bar on this so it makes it harder for them, the threat actors and the bad actors, to perform a password cracking activity on your credit union and your members. In addition to what Thomas said from a NCUA and Southeast and national level, here's some of the things we're seeing out there from the state level. Okay. Critical and sensitive data not encrypted, irregular IT audits and risk assessments. What that means is there should be a program. Okay. And the guidance there that we get from both NCUA and the state is, at least on an annual basis, you should be performing IT audits and IT risk assessments. Number 3, irregular board reporting. There should be, at least annually, we report the results and the state of our information security program to the board for their review. No multi-factor authentication on critical systems, including email. Thomas talked about this as well. Insufficient business continuity, incident response plans, and testing to deal with incidents. The other thing I would add there that Thomas mentioned, that at least on all your systems and your network should be a full restore business continuity test on your systems and your network systems, but also with regards to ransomware testing, since we're highlighting that as one of the top threats, is one of the favorite ways and effective ways to test that is do some tabletop exercises. Pick some scenarios. And since we're in the Southeast and we got a hurricane, tropical storm heading our way again, what are we going to do during a hurricane from a business continuity and a ransomware perspective? All right, those are good scenarios to test. Inadequate vendor management. Make sure we hold our vendors accountable for securing our members' data. And in addition to that, to make sure that they shore up their technologies and incident response as well. And one of the other things I might mention here is your payment system vulnerabilities. When you're doing your vulnerability testing, do not ignore your payment systems. Okay. That's one of the critical items. That is the crown jewels. That's what they're looking after. In addition to that, I might mention on this list is the fact that last fall, and it continues as well, there's a lot of attacks on our ATM. And Thomas had mentioned skimming, but also attacks on our ATM network as well. And one of the recommendations coming out is make sure your ATM network is segmented from your credit union network. All right, and this is a list, and like Dave says, we'll be happy to provide a copy of this presentation upon request for Dave. But to be compliant with your information security program, which our benchmark here is NCUA Reg 748A and B, these are the things you should be doing. These are the things that are isolated and itemized within the regulation. And I'll just run through them quickly. Make sure your information security policies are board approved. Your incident response program is board approved, tested. How many times are we going to talk about that today? Business continuity, disaster recovery plan. Make sure your vendor management is current. You've got the proper due diligence in place, and routine audit and testing of those controls. Your cybersecurity awareness program. Keep your security technologies current to detect, protect, and alert of an incident. Routine risk assessments, and regular management, supervisory committee, and board reporting. And last but not least, make sure you are subscribing to some type of threat advisory services so you can keep current with what the current threat level is and do that risk assessment internally to see what controls need to be upgraded or improved in order to thwart these new threats that are coming on this horizon or are currently here. All right, this is my last slide, and then we'll move into Q&A. What to do with AI, artificial intelligence. Now we're looking in the future. I was going to relabel this slide, the good, the bad, the ugly. But there's so many good things AI can do and are doing, not only from an overall awareness and marketing perspective, but there's some things from a technology perspective, particularly in our world, of how we're using, we collectively, the security industry, are using it to detect threats, current threats, but the bad guys are using it as well. So the advice here is, if you're planning or if you have already, make sure you develop a business case to bring AI into your credit union. Evaluate the pros and cons, what is the benefits, and perform a risk assessment. What are the issues, okay, of bringing bringing AI into the credit union, and make sure we combat those risks. The biggest thing, and then be careful, obviously, using member information. The biggest thing is the technology and what member information you're using, because there's a lot of open source AI technology out there. So make sure you vet, okay, your AI partner that you're working with. And when I say that, a part of your vendor due diligence now, and I think this is a important point, when you are planning on bringing some type of AI technology via an AI vendor, part of your due diligence process should be, are they using AI? Are your vendors using AI? If they are, what's the platform and what information are they collecting? And then you need to make a risk assessment on whether it's appropriate for the credit union to take on that risk, or have they done all the right things to mitigate the risk of the credit union, protect the credit union information, and protect the member information, which goes to the next bullet point. Make sure you work with trusted and proven partners. And like any other technology out there, okay, make sure you monitor and control AI on your network. Okay, with that, our session takeaways. Prepare for ransomware, BEC, and friendly and elderly fraud. Prepare for artificial intelligence. What are we going to do with this? What are your vendors going to do with it? And be vigilant. I might want to say this as well. Employee awareness is huge. We have October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So it's a good time, obviously, to get all your awareness activities and materials out there, and not only for your employees, but for your members as well. And I think it's also a good time during Cybersecurity Month that you look at your information security program and make sure it's current and where you want to be, and what you need to do to prepare for 2025. And with that, I'll end with this. We have a hurricane heading our way. We think it's a hurricane. There's going to be a hurricane, Helene, coming. Now's the time after this call to make sure we dust off our business continuity and disaster recovery plan, make sure we're ready for this. And so we're prepared for when Helene either hits or doesn't hit or stays around for a while. But that would be a good activity in addition to your awareness and reviewing your information security policies and procedures and program for 2025. So with that, as Thomas says in this presentation, there's a resource page that directs you to those particular references from NCUA that we've talked about during this presentation. So that'll be a part of this presentation. And that's all I have. And now we'll turn it over to Dave. And thank you for listening to us today. Here's my contact information. If you have any specific questions for me on my presentation, or in general, your information, health of your information security program. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dave.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. You know, on the topic of AI, what are some of the major risks that a credit union might face if they're deploying AI?
A great question. I touched on it a little bit, but the biggest risk is vet your technology, because there's a lot of open source technology which you don't want to have. Okay, there are proprietary technologies out there that have done a good job of preparing their technology from a security perspective and a control perspective. And they have confidentiality agreements, and you can have confidentiality agreements in place and incident response agreements in place. So your technology provider on this is very, very important. The second, and probably one of the, it mirrors number one, is how are you going to use AI? What critical information are you going to use AI? Because we're of the thought that any type of member information you get that has a risk of being exploited. So review how you're going to use it internally, what information you're going to share, and be very, very guarded with how much information you share. I know we're kind of limiting the scope and the value of AI, but that's very important because AI is so powerful. Okay, it can take on a life of its own, and make sure you work with a reliable vendor, and from an ongoing perspective, make sure that you're monitoring the use of AI. I also want to mention is that you should also have, if you're planning on deploying AI, you should put a policy in place as well that says, here's the appropriate use of AI with our credit union that has been approved and endorsed by the supervisory committee and our board. Thomas, did you want to add anything to that from an NCUA perspective?
Yes, Jim. So I wanted to add to make sure that you talk to your vendor, whoever is providing that AI application, where your data is going to and how the data is being used. A lot of times, I know most of the vendors provide their own AI environment,
Right.
but sometimes it's being shared with I guess it goes out on the internet. I don't know. So make sure that the data your application is being collecting about your members is being saved with the vendor in their own cloud, and it's not going on the public internet. So definitely revise your policies, whether you have a standalone separate AI policy or your standard information security policy, update it with data classification, and make sure that the data is secure and not being leaked out somewhere else or sold for that matter.
Right. Perfect.
Okay, we have 5 more minutes remaining. I think we have time for another question I have here. For Jim, what are best practices for timing and occurrence of business continuity and disaster recovery testing?
Thomas alluded to this, and from a best practice and compliance perspective, from a full business continuity and disaster recovery perspective, and that is not just your core systems and your other cloud systems, which your vendors are providing you all that information with regards to testing, but also your internal system, at least one time a year, okay, that annually, that we should be testing our systems, both our vendor systems and our internal systems. And now, if there's any change or if there's an incident that you had, that may be more often, okay, that you want to do this. All right, but at least once a year to prove that it's working, you can fully recover. And the other thing, as we mentioned, if you do some tabletops, that depends on your threat environment. And like I said earlier, ransomware tabletop is a great tabletop to do minimum once a year, but you can also pick out some other type of tabletops on a business continuity disaster recovery set that you can do with your employees to make sure they have all their resources available, and that they can meet, and this is very, very important on your business continuity and disaster recovery plan. Make sure you know what your RTOs are and RPOs are, recovery time objectives, recovery point objectives, and make sure you are meeting those, okay, with regards to your testing and your tabletop Thomas, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, 100% agree with you, Jim. Annual testing is for disaster recovery, business continuity. That's a must nowadays. For the other tests, incident response to ransomware, malware, and etc. Tabletop tests are okay, but the full disaster recovery test annually, and also again make sure that all the departments are involved, not only IT or the core system. Everybody needs to be involved: accounting, payment systems, marketing, lending. Everybody needs to be involved and test their own systems they have in their departments.
All right, Jim. Thank you very much for answering those questions. I just want to point out to the audience, if you are reaching out to Jim here using his contact information on the screen, please tell him that you heard about us on the Leverage webinar. I'd appreciate that.
Hey, Dave. Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
Before you conclude, may I make one closing remark, please?
Absolutely.
And Thomas, you can chime in on this right now. We are right now where we are, we're at a very high threat level with what's going on the geopolitical front and the election front. So whatever we had been doing, first part of the year, these next 3 to 4 months, we need to heighten our awareness, okay, and revisit. I mentioned this earlier. Now's a good time to revisit your information security program. But right now, the threat level is escalating, and we need to raise our antennas a little bit more, okay, if not a lot more. That's saying there's probably some things that we're a prime target and prime environment, something to happen. I'm not trying to be the downer on this one, but that could happen here in the next 3, 4, 5, or the next quarter. So we need to have our antennas raised, and that's the message I wanted to raise about this in this webinar, that's saying our threat level is escalating. So hopefully we've given you some information today that'll help you do that. Thomas, anything else?
No, 100%. 100%, you're right. It's not a question of if you're getting breached, but when. So, and by that time, you want to be in the best position to mitigate that impact from it. But I can guarantee you will be hit in one way or another. So let's make sure you're in the best position you can be.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Thomas and Jim, for your very informative presentations. I want to thank the audience for attending today. We had a nice turnout. And again, you can see in the chat my email address. So if you'd like a copy of the slide deck along with a link to the recording, just shoot me an email. So with that, I wish you all a great rest of your day. Have a nice afternoon.
Thank you for attending, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.